Hi, everyone. Welcome back to CrossLabs. This is the CrossLabs monthly fun forum where we invite speakers to give all sorts of really fun talks. Today, we are here at CrossLabs HQ in Kyoto. We are very excited because we have a special guest with us today, live in person. Normally, we have these online and through Zoom or some sort of other setup, but we're here in person and we're very excited. So first, just a little bit about Crossroads, CrossLabs, and CrossCampus. So, like I said, Crossroads is our monthly fun forum where we invite speakers. We have all sorts of talks, and we talk a lot about intelligence and computation and all sorts of other things like that. And Cross Labs is all really interested in understanding the fundamental mechanisms of intelligence. But this is a huge problem, right? And the reason why it's so large is because there's so many fields that get involved in trying to understand what is intelligence, what do we mean by intelligence, and it involves neuroscience, it involves computational studies, it involves tons of things, right? But of course, we wouldn't be able to do this series without the amazing support from CrossCampus, who is a leading AI research center here in Japan. They're located in Tokyo, but they're always supporting us, and without them, we wouldn't have this. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Today we have with us Seth Bullock, who is at the University of Bristol. He's a professor there, but he also is starting a very exciting project, and that's what he's here to talk about today. So he is the new director of a brand new research hub called the AI for Collective Intelligence, and he's going to tell us all about it. So without further ado, I'm now going to
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thanks for having me. It's very exciting to be here. So what I thought we would do, I'm actually here to listen, really, to Alyssa, Olaf, and other people at CrossLabs more than talk. But I thought what we might do is take a couple of minutes to set context with a bit of information about this new research hub and what we're setting out to do. And then I'm interested in discussing what this topic, AI for collective intelligence, means to different people, and how it might be taken forward in different ways by different research groups. So hopefully you can see some slides, and I'll walk you through some information about the hub. So really, the idea for this, or the kind of origin of National AI Research Hub in the UK, is our current government, which we have for the next few days, because we're just about to have an election. So over the last year and a half, the UK government has got very interested in stimulating AI within the UK. So there's been a lot of interest in spending or allocating research money to UK universities to try to push forward different kinds of AI. And that has ended up being spent in lots of different ways, I think somewhat chaotically, right? There's been a big push to spend this money. So, for example, projects in AI for net zero and AI for healthcare, and a brand new responsible AI activity led out of the University of Southampton, 12 new AI PhD programs hosted in universities across the country, the very first national AI supercomputer. So that's a large supercomputer facility that is owned by the country and is used to support research across the entire UK. £500 million worth of UK AI hardware to UK universities, and specific what we want to talk about today, 9 of these new AI research hubs. So when you add that up, that's about £1 billion worth of investment over the last 2 years, and the speed with which that has been deployed, and the fact that it has involved almost every AI research group in the country, means that there are a lot of things starting and trying to get themselves set up and get themselves organized. So the research hub Alyssa mentioned is one of these new 9 national AI research hubs. It's led out of Bristol by me and my colleagues. It involves 7 universities across the entire UK, across all 4 of the constituent countries that make up the United Kingdom. So AI for collective intelligence. What is that? What do we want to do? Well, to get this kind of thing set up, you need a very simple story. And I think this is a very simple idea. National scale AI for UK collective intelligence. Collective intelligence, the way we're framing it, is something that happens naturally all the time. So whenever a bunch of people are together and they talk to each other and that helps them have better ideas, that is collective intelligence. And we've used it traditionally throughout history in very traditional ways. So when there's an election or when we run a market, those are traditional forms of collective intelligence. People interact and we achieve a kind of outcome that's good at the collective level and maybe is good for some individuals as well. But with the origination, with the advent of the internet, there are new opportunities for collective intelligence, and there are companies that have been founded that are exploiting crowdsourcing to do things like track brands by using social media data or track ongoing disasters using real-time data streams or collaborative citizen science activities mediated by the internet. So all of those are large-scale collective intelligence activities that don't rely on face-to-face interactions between people that know each other, and they gain something from that huge scale, but also they lose something because the anonymity and the kind of context freeness of those activities can create issues. And so far, we've not talked about the involvement of any kind of AI. So AI for Collective Intelligence Hub is what happens when we bring AI to this kind of collective intelligence setting. So far, everything that I talked about on this slide is about pooling information from diverse people in order to do something central, right? To elect one person, to sell one commodity at a price, or to make money for one company. And that is something, that kind of centralization is characteristic of modern AI. And there are maybe two issues that we see with that, a sort of monolithic nature of modern AI and what people are starting to call an AI divide. So a standard model now for the kinds of exciting AI that is causing the Conservative government to want to stand next to a large supercomputer and cut a ribbon looks like this. A bunch of people are generating data, and that data is being gathered. Possibly they don't even realize that that's happening. That data is being put through some machine learning analytics, through an AI interface to enable a person to get an answer to a question. So it's monolithic in the sense that it's just one person interacting with that AI, one at a time, answering important questions, like, please make me a picture of a dog on a skateboard. And all of these pictures of dogs on skateboard are the result. But one thing that's clear from this is we've got a model that is a pipeline from the many to the few. Many people generate the raw data, and relatively few people benefit from it. Potentially rich people, technologically savvy people, people that work for big companies. So the AI divide is something which is creating a gap between the people that are fueling AI and the people that are benefiting from it. So AI for collective intelligence is a very simple alternative picture, which is you just replace that pipeline with a loop. So we're still taking data from a collective system of people and devices and software agents and robots, agencies, and we're still gathering intelligence from that data using machine learning analytics. And we may even still be providing centralized, high-level value at the level of the entire collective, maybe for an agency like the UK's National Health Service. But the interesting bit is this bottom part of the loop, where we attempt to unbundle that intelligence that we've collected so that we can feed it back to the individual again. And we have to feed it back in a way that is bespoke, tailored to their particular circumstances, so that a Black middle-class woman living in Wales who is managing diabetes is not going to necessarily be given the same guidance as a white working-class man who's living in a big city. So the idea here is putting AI back in the hands of the citizens that generated the data fueled it in the first place. And that's something that can occur across many different settings. But here, the thing to note is we've moved from this kind of centralized, from the many to the few, to a more multi-level decision support, where we're helping maybe agencies at the top level make good policies, but we're also helping individuals and groups of individuals make good decisions. So here's an example. This is Julia Gog. She is the head of Juniper, which is a consortium of academics that do epidemiological modeling, and they were involved in driving the modeling for the UK government during COVID. So she believes if we're collecting data from the population during the next pandemic, we can use machine learning to extract useful information about that. How fast is the disease rising in various parts of the country? And that can be used to set policy nationally. Should there be a lockdown? Should there not be a lockdown? But that also it can be used to drive or support decision making of individual people, individual citizens, that they can understand the risk that they're taking if they take a bus journey, or the risk that they are imposing on the bus driver whenever they take a bus journey. And that by informing the public more directly and helping them manage their decisions, hopefully you get more consistent uptake of the kinds of policies that are trying to be implemented, and you get a more life-saving response to that pandemic. So there are challenges here. Clearly, this is very sensitive data that you're collecting, and people have to trust your system with it. So privacy-preserving machine learning is going to be really crucial. We're not going to want to be able to reveal things about individuals who are part of this system. We're going to need to be aware of the fact that these systems are changing, dynamic, that there will be anomalies, there will be regime change, there will be shifts, and we can't assume that those won't be there. More socio-technical questions about trust and fairness are going to be really important in terms of the governance of these kind of systems and their ongoing management. In a different setting, I already mentioned diabetes. This is Dr. Hermione Price. She works for the NHS in Southampton on the south coast of the UK. She cares about diabetes in patients that have additional problems that make them hard to help. So they might have mental health issues, they might be in poverty, they might be homeless. And she believes the same story applies to diabetes, that if we collect data from a large cohort of diabetes patients, and we use machine learning to understand the patterns in the way that people are managing their condition, that can help the NHS at the top level set better policies for how to maybe allocate technologies to diabetes patients. But you can also unbundle that information and use it to give guidance back to individuals that is bespoke to their circumstances. So you might be able to, for example, anticipate things that are likely to be important for a diabetes patient in the coming months or the coming years, based on what has been important for other diabetes patients like them, and alert patients to that and help them manage their condition in a way that reduces the risk that they're having, that their condition puts them in hospital, and also lowers the cost of managing diabetes for the entire country. And again, the sort of underpinning challenges are the same: privacy, change point detection, trust, algorithmic fairness, and the whole raft of other problems. So the AI for CI Hub is going to look at this question across 5 domains: health, pandemics, finance, the environment, and smart cities. And the idea is that we will see common features in the solutions that cut across those different domains, and we will also see things that are unique to each domain. So by collaborating across those domains, we end up understanding and being able to deliver more robust findings. So the kind of research that cut across this, and the kind of things the Hub is going to be interested in, really range from quite prosaic data science and data management questions. And on this slide, I'm going to detail them. But on the next slide, I'm going to pick up something that I think is more interesting to companies like Cross Labs, research groups like people who work in artificial life or complex systems. So clearly, you have to be able to detect the patterns in these real-time data streams in order to spot the things that are going to drive your policies or help people manage their behavior. You have to understand that the collective that you're deriving the data from is not just a mass of identical individuals, that there is structure within it. There are groups, communities, and that structure is changing. So a lot of technologies make an assumption of stationarity, that the statistics of the system are effectively the same and will not change. But we know that real world systems are not stationary. They go through radical changes, and anticipating those changes and accommodating them is going to be important. I've already mentioned privacy, but we also need to understand how these smart agents, the vehicle that we have that will deliver guidance to individuals, are smart software agents, maybe sitting on your phone or on a page that can help you make decisions. So we need to understand how those can be deployed in ways that can create positive change. We also, if we're going to do this at a national scale or even a transnational scale, we need to understand how to do it in a way that is fit for purpose, that really pushes forward best practice in this area, and particular questions about governance. So how do users feel represented in the governance bodies that oversee these AI systems? So crucially, these systems will change over time. So this is not a kind of fire and forget one-shot problem where you set up some governance at the start and that's the job done. These systems are going to evolve and change. As they start changing people's behavior, that will change the way people interact with them. So you need to have this continuous, ongoing governance challenge. You need these systems to be usable. So whatever AI interface you're thinking about, it has to be embedded in devices and portals that are usable by many different kinds of people, not just by tech-savvy early adopters. Like tech bros are maybe the worst kind of people to be in the room when you're designing these sorts of systems. So these are quite generic AI sort of challenges, but underpinning the thing is, I think, one central tension that has some relevance to ALife and complex systems. So what we're talking about are kind of stratified, multi-level systems. There's the whole collective, every diabetes patient in the UK. We want to be able to say that the systems that we're putting in place are good at the collective level. And right at the bottom, the micro level, each individual diabetes patient should get benefit from interacting with this system. And intermediate, there might be groups, so local health authorities or a family maybe, that where there is a diabetes patient and their children and their partner, and actually it's that ecosystem around the patient that is a kind of unit that you should care about. So traditional framings of this sort of problem don't do a good job of respecting this multi-level nature, right? So a game theoretic approach, for example, privileges the individual. Individuals are the only agents in a game theory model. Any kind of collective outcome is the result of individual strategic behavior. Game theory also assumes stationarity. We're looking at a game that is fixed. We're looking at the world's statistics are also fixed. And they also neglect kind of meso-level organization that we might care about. So there is no spatial structure, there is no community structure. And those structures are probably things that we will want to leverage. There's probably something about living in Cardiff that is important to assisting people with diabetes who live in Cardiff. So by neglecting those things, you tend to end up with this issue where AI agents are monolithic. They are delivering something which is supposed to help a user, but in ignorance of what the effect on other users might be. And that is maybe okay for median users. So someone like myself, who is a man, middle class, white, you're not going to be disadvantaged by interacting with this kind of AI. But if you are a marginal member of the community, if you're from a minority, or if there's something about you that makes you radically different from the norm, that is going to be ignored. We need to make sure that it doesn't damage people. So it strikes me that ALife approaches have something to say to these questions, because ALife approaches do care about multi-level systems, and they do care about community structure and spatially and temporally extended systems, and they care about this kind of emergence of higher level outcomes from lower level interactions, and they even sometimes countenance downward causation from the collective to the individual. So they're much more open to framings, models, theories, tools that are going to shed light on these questions of multi-level AI collective intelligence. And that was really the topic that I wanted to open up for discussion today. So I'll stop there. These are my lovely collaborators. The AI Hub I'm talking about spread across 7 universities, about 14 academics, all getting started, hiring postdocs. If you're interested in this sort of question, if you're interested in this kind of AI, please head to our webpage, have a look at the postdoc positions that we're advertising right now. We'll be hiring about 12 postdocs, about 12 PhD students over the next few weeks. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Oh, that's super cool. Thank you so much for that amazing overview. I think that this hub is going to address a lot of questions that are, so, I mean, honestly, like, they're very burning right now, with AI being so prevalent in our lives, right? And especially this AI the gap that you talked about, which is a lot like the technology gap, where some people have smartphones. Well, most people have smartphones, but what about the people who don't have access to like the internet technology or smartphones? You know, I think that we're seeing that again today, and it's really important to address it. So I have a lot of questions, and I think we're going to have a great discussion. And I also hope that some people online who are watching right now can join. We have a Slido, and the Slido will be shared in the YouTube chat if it hasn't been shared already. So if you're watching this and you have some questions, please don't hesitate or be afraid to pop some of those questions in the chat, on the Slido especially, and I will work those questions into our conversation. So while we're waiting for some Slido questions, so ALife, right? I think there are so many questions that my ALife brain is going, okay, what do we, what are the things that stick out? And I think the one that sticks out the largest to me is this idea of these different levels where AI is applied, right? So not just in like this pipeline that you talked about, but within this loop where you have AI that is ensuring that privacy, and then there's AI that is ensuring that people who are marginalized are having are benefiting from AI as well, and many different levels at which AI models and technology can be applied. I think that's fantastic. And from an AI perspective, though, this idea of what is a meaningful level, I think, is really important. So I guess, what are your thoughts on trying to identify these meaningful levels in such a large social technical system like this?
Yeah, so I think that's one of I'm also really interested in. I don't think I necessarily have a handle on it yet, but so there's definitely a community within ALife that are interested in questions like how did the first like major transitions of evolution, where before a transition you've got a bunch of free living individuals. After the transition, they have coalesced into a new unit of individuation, and that somehow uh, that has achieved a kind of improved level of functionality. There are things that now are happening that couldn't happen before. So that feels reminiscent of the challenge that we might have, where we start out with a bunch of diabetes patients, maybe signed up to the scheme or using the same thing. But we know that actually not every diabetes patient is equally relevant to every other diabetes patient. We want to find those communities, find relevant groupings so that we can share a strategy that has worked for these diabetes patients in Newcastle. There are these diabetes patients in Cardiff that would benefit from that. So how do we bootstrap that? I think that is the same problem as how did these higher order units of individuation arrive. It's going to be to do with flows of information. It's going to be to do with kind of reflexive relationships that we built, and I think it might leverage things like spatial embedding. So if you're trying to form communities of people and you don't respect the fact that some of them live near to each other, maybe you're going to struggle to cement those kind of communities in ways that make them persist, like without needing to pump lots of energy into maintaining it. So I think there's this kind of possible loose analogy between achieving organic kind of communities, anonymous organic communities in these collective intelligence systems, because I think anonymity is going to need to be at least a default assumption, because, for example, sharing your healthcare situation with people, people maybe are not comfortable doing that. So how do you facilitate that? I think maybe there are lessons from Origin of Life or lessons from the major evolutionary transitions that we might be able to take advantage of.
And what sort of lessons do you think those would be from major transitions?
That's a really good question. So, I mean, I think there is something about reflexivity which comes from spatial embedding. So I've been interested for a long time in the fact that when you take systems of elements that have some relationships and you look at those in a well-mixed system, there are situations where you don't get anything interesting happening. But if you take that exact same system and you lay those elements out in space and you constrain interactions to be spatially local, then you get interesting structures and persistent cooperation persisting. So I think it's a little bit of a bias. But spatial embedding is something that I think is important.
Yeah, that totally. That's a really interesting point. And not just spatial embedding, perhaps, but especially if we think about interacting on the internet, it's not necessarily a physical spatial embedding, right? It's kind of like a virtual spatial embedding as well, depending on the kind of network. Some social media sites might have their own sort of spatial embedding than other ones, some other systems, but I imagine that's also
good. So real systems rely on physical spatial embedding. So, but with these systems, we have the chance to design some embedding from scratch. We can choose what that might be. So, really, all it needs to do is make some interactions happen more readily, and some interact at the expense of other interactions. And how you do that in virtual collective is up to the designer. It does feel like that's something that we haven't necessarily been great at, and online environments like social media systems like Twitter and Facebook are experiments in making that work, and they have some properties that have been successful and other properties maybe people are not so happy about. So what do we learn of the successes, and how do we guard against the problems? I think is something that is quite interesting. But key to across these different things is getting away from this unembedded sort of high dimensional space where everyone is equally likely to connect with everyone, and then you don't get a chance to form these communities, or at least it's much harder, it's much more effort to do that. So you need some sort of simplifying embedding that gives people a chance to organize into these collectives or these sort of mesa level structures that are going to help solve the problem.
Yes, and that's like a really interesting, super interesting and super relevant problem for ALife research, right?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's interesting here is the term collective intelligence, which is a research area. It's like a sort of complicated research area in that I think it's a phrase that is used by quite a lot of different types of researcher. So you can be a animal behavior researcher who's interested in how fish school, and that's a kind of collective intelligence. Or you can be a psychologist who's interested in how groups of people in a company make good decisions. You're interested in things like groupthink and wisdom of the crowds, and that's collective intelligence. You can be interested in crowdsourcing technologies, so sort of online debate forums, and that's collective intelligence. And so these are kind of, they share something, but they're very different in terms of the phenomena that the people are trying to understand, and whether they're doing empirical experiments or whether they're doing models. It feels like we're entering a phase really where collective intelligence research has a chance to reconnect. Sort of post-COVID, there's this feeling of restarting, right? Conferences are restarting, physical meetings are happening again, people are traveling a little bit more, and it feels like the collective intelligence community uh, is fermenting in some way. And I think ALife is probably at the edges of that collective intelligence, is adjacent to it, overlapping with it. So certainly swarm intelligence has been a theme within ALife and a theme within collective intelligence. And so it feels like there's lots of intersections and overlaps there where there's potential for exciting ideas that we might need in order to achieve the kind of systems that I've been talking about.
Right, exactly. There's so much data out there. We live in this digital age, and there's really a bunch of data. So it seems like an exciting thing to, explore ALife research with data that you get off of that's like actual, right, real data, right?
One of the people that I spoke to on my trip to Japan this time is Takashi Ikegami, who's an academic at the University of Tokyo. So he has ideas, what he calls massive data flow systems. So an example of a massive data flow system is the brain. Another example would be the internet. And related to the point you made a bit earlier, I think one of his ideas is that when you have systems where they're subject to a huge flow of data, but the elements inside are organizing themselves in response to that data, that the kind of non-spatial structure that you were talking about may arise kind of spontaneously in that sort of situation. So you drive a whole bunch of data through the computers and people that make up the internet, and the response is, user groups and online communities and viral waves of tweeting. Those structures are kind of natural responses in the same way that when you drive sensory information through a brain, you see structuring in terms of memories or behavioral kind of patterns. So that sense that maybe you can, without predefining the structure that you want, if you set up the right kind of data flow sort of cycle, then you might spontaneously see those structures arise. And I mean, there's a sort of Panglossian worry that just because they arise, they necessarily are the best structures. That's where this issue that I keep coming back to of a sort of marginal member of the community. So it might be that groups form spontaneously, and that 80% of the people are happy because they are in a group, and the group is really big, and the people in their group are relevant to them, and it's useful for them, and they're doing better with diabetes by being part of that group. But 20% of people don't find themselves in those groups because they're not as obedient, or they are marginalized for various reasons. And if you aren't paying attention, you could think, okay, we've done a great job here. 80% of people are very happy, but the most vulnerable people that need the most support, are precisely the people that are not being served by this system. So it remains to be seen whether kind of naturalistic kind of framings are responsible ways of engineering these systems.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it's something that would have to be tested and understood very well, which is, of course, something that is like a really big topic is trying to understand how these technologies impact us, particularly before they become implemented, right?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the nice things about this kind of ambition is that you don't really have to solve the bottom half of that loop before you start seeing some value. So if you are the UK government and you're implementing policies, if you have this kind of AI for collective intelligence loop implemented, then you're in a much better position to understand and monitor what the downstream effect of those policies are. So the UK has implemented policies in the past and dismantled those policies a few years later, I think in a way that has not be evidence-driven, right? That's politically driven. One government sets something up, the next government dismantles it and replaces it with something else. Whereas if you're locked into this kind of feedback loop, I think it's harder to dismantle policies that are working, and it's easier to dismantle policies that aren't working. Even if you're not actually, if you haven't solved this bespoke guidance for everybody perfectly, you'll be in this kind of sensory feedback loop of monitoring and setting policy and having the next wave of monitoring tell you something about what the effect of that policy was.
Right, absolutely. And I guess, how do you see something like this in a day-to-day life, right? So I'm a citizen of the UK, and it's 20 years into the future, and the research was extremely successful, and we know lots of different ways. Like, is it something that I get a notification on my future smart glass? Or is it something that I shouldn't even notice, and it just has a positive?
So I think that's a really good question. I don't think we have got a full answer yet. My gut feeling is that it's more the former. I think that insidious positive things happening without you noticing. I mean, maybe that, I guess there's good elements of that, but it feels slightly covert. And I think the more overt side is maybe at least to be focused on first, which is I deliberately sign up to be part of something. That downloads an app onto whatever we have that is taking the place of smartphones in 20 years' time. And that app helps me do things that I needed to do. So there is a sense that I am explicitly gaining some benefit from opting into this. So, for example, imagine the kind of pandemic setting we're talking about is have an app on your phone, and it is giving you, during a pandemic, kind of real-time information about the risk that the pandemic poses to people around you, not just yourself. But one of the things that I think is quite interesting is understanding the ramifications of risk-taking for the people who live around, right? So it might be that you are happy to take a bus journey, you're young and healthy, and you're comfortable with the idea that you're taking the risk of getting the disease, but you don't mind. But if it became apparent to you as a vector what knock-on consequences there were for people of your grandparents' age who live in the same building as you, then I think that adds a layer that helps you make better decisions. But you don't have to wait for a pandemic. I think as long as you've got those sorts of technology in place, things like seasonal flu, which happens every year and puts some vulnerable people at risk, so some old people and some young people or some immune system compromised people, understanding whether you're in the peak of a hotspot of seasonal flu could be something that parents of young children might think twice about having a birthday party this weekend, because you don't want your grand to get flu by inviting 20 snotty children into your house. So normalizing just sort of regular day-to-day decision making, the input of these kind of collective intelligence systems. So not something where you ask a monolithic question. Is it risky to have a birthday party? But at the moment, you could ask Google that, and it will give you a generic answer. Right? Getting children together can be risky because you're bringing lots of kids in, and kids can be incubators of colds and flu. But moving from that to a much more bespoke and collective intelligence-driven system that is about the here and now, right now, in my town, on my street, what is the risk of doing that? And not just the risk to me, but the kind of some sense of what that collective risk is. If we ended up in a country where that was a normal part of making decisions, like at the very beginning of the pandemic in the UK, there was a very big race at Cheltenham, horse racing, and there was a decision made to let it go ahead right at the start of the pandemic. It wasn't clear maybe that, how much risk that posed. And in retrospect, it probably was a bad idea to let it go ahead. A lot of people traveled to that and mingled and ended up being a kind of spreader event. So people running events as part of their risk management might have access to these sorts of tools, and it might help them to make good decisions about when things should be cancelled or what the up and downside of cancelling or going ahead or putting constraints would be. So that's sort of just raising, I guess, imagine a country where the level of decision making has just been kind of elevated by access to these sorts of technologies.
And that's another big thing for life is this idea of sensing. And it seems like the monolithic models that we have right now, they are trained on data that is already like very quickly becoming out of date because our world moves very fast. And it's also extremely expensive to update the kind of data that is in these models. I mean, for example, like what if a huge world event happens that changes everything we know about, something social systems, right? All of a sudden, these models that we're used to interacting with will have to be trained. That's extremely expensive, and it takes a lot of effort in order to get that new data. So, but for life, a lot of people are interested in this idea of sensing and trying to understand what are the relevant things to sense for me, and how long does it take for that data to get to me? Should I take that into should I keep that in mind when I'm making decisions and things like that?
Yeah, so I think one of the nice things about this, so we're not talking about LLMs that are trained on the entirety of human text, and then you have to be concerned about, the world changes. There's not enough text written about what's happened in the last month, so your LLM is still kind of representing the sum total of human history. We're talking more about real-time systems that are locked into a data flow. So there's a constant stream of data being generated by all the diabetes patients in the UK or by all of the sensing that is happening during the pandemic. And so you're in an ongoing dynamic kind of model from the word go, and you're going to need to care about whether the data that you're sensing is indicating that there's been a shift. Are we moving from one regime to another regime? It's going to be a question that is constantly important. So maybe something slightly less maybe significant than diabetes, but something like asthma, you're going to see fluctuations based around the climate, around the weather, or pollen or something like that. So those kind of anticipatory signals that are indicating we're leaving one regime and entering another are going to be as important part of the system's predictability as the steady state ability.
Yeah. Wow. It actually sounds a lot like magic, really.
Well, I hope not. One of the things, I guess, one of the ambitions for these hubs is you have to sort of push at this to find out where the limits are. And it's quite possible that some of the things that I'm glibly talking about, it's like there may be signal noise ratios that prevent you from having the granularity to be able to do some of the things that I'm talking about, or there might just be gappiness in the data. I mean, one of the problems is that probably the people that I've been talking about who are maybe the key target for these systems possibly are the people that generate the least data, or the data is least accurate. But there are maybe the dice are stacked against some of these outcomes. But there are nice kind of theoretical tools about anticipating regime change, which I don't think have been tested in these kind of settings. And so there are starting points where you could look for help with answering some of these questions. So the critical slowing down literature argues that whenever a dynamical system leaves one phase of attraction and enters another, as the parameters that are driving that transition, as you get to the tipping point, you will see this critical slowing down. The response of the system to perturbation starts to become more sluggish, and you could look for signatures like that spot the difference between, a community that is successfully exchanging information and is being useful. If that community starts to erode, or it becomes fragile, or too many people leave, at some point it becomes not useful, or maybe even counterproductive. And you could look for signatures from the slowing down literature to spot those transitions before they happen.
Oh, very nice. That sounds super useful, honestly. And I was just also thinking, imagining the kind of world that has that sort of technology implemented, and it feels a lot. To me, the word hypersensitive sort of came to mind, where we leverage technology to share our senses of the world in a way that is safe and secure and things like that. But we had a hypersensitive world where we knew relevant data, like is it safe to plan a birthday party right now? If there's a pandemic happening, the answer is probably no, right? But if we have that sort of access to information, it feels like it would be extremely empowering, especially in the sense that if you are in like a marginalized, so if you're a person in a marginalized community, it's something that would be sensitive for you as well. And it also feels a lot like, because I know you mentioned diabetes, but it also feels a lot like going into the realm of personalized medicine, not in terms of like creating, custom medications and things like that, but for sharing information, especially with the examples that you used, it does feel a lot like that.
Yeah, so I mean, the NHS talks about care pathways. So you can't afford really to treat every individual as a unique system. They have to be put on the best care pathway for them, but there's a sort of generic nature to that. And personalized medicine offers the kind of opposite. It's sort of, okay, unique to you, we can design this kind of brace that means that the operation on your spine is like specific to exactly your spine, or we know exactly about your DNA, so we can tailor drugs specifically to your metabolism or whatever. So what this is doing is somewhere in the middle. It sort of feels like it's not investing enough effort to design something on a case-by-case, person-by-person basis, but it's kind of finding collectives, finding groupings, finding trends that mean not everyone is just being put on the same care pathway. So I don't know, that middle ground is somewhat vague, and it sort of crucially depends on being able to find the patterns and the groupings that work and shift them when you need to shift them. But yes, I think personalized medicine feels for a country like the UK, apart from in some niche areas, maybe it's going to be very expensive to do personalized medicine for these kind of for something like that. But there's some kind of balance act to be achieved there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
But the hypersensitive idea, I feel like there's a risk that you tip in the other direction, and that once these systems are in place and people rely on them, you become sort of desensitized. Like you're not actually thinking about these issues anymore because it's become normalized to rely on guidance from your little device. So the risk is that you sort of diminish people's engagement with these questions because you have automated them. So there's always this kind of tension between automating something opens it up to more people, so more people can do a t-test because Excel allows you to do a t-test by just typing t-test. So everyone who has Excel can do a t-test. But should everyone be doing a t-test? Like, you need to understand whether doing a t-test is the right statistical test for you. And by automating it, you risk kind of making it too easy for people to deploy things without thinking about it. So I think that's a tension in all of these AI projects. I think that's this risk of uncritical use of AI, which potentially might not be good news.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because it's sort of like it kind of makes me think, if we have automated intelligence, how much, I guess, like how much automation is a bad thing. And it always reminds me of different conversations that people had. I think it's like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. And it's always the same: too much automation is too much automation. But now we're getting to the point where even intelligence decision making is becoming more automated. And I think the example with the tea test is a really good one. And I don't know, maybe this is a question for AI as well. Is I don't know, like, can how does a system change? A system, like, how do individuals change? How do societies change? How do groups, people or individuals change when various levels of intelligence or decision making is automated?
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting. So one of the things that I'm interested in is how, in the West anyway, how wedded we have become to the notion that the individual is primary and the individual is what matters. So economics, biology, they're very individual first. Is economics, biology, game theory is nice. At least it says very explicitly that we're individual first. Work on that economic individual decision makers are the proper kind of level of description, and everything else is secondary. Other sciences don't even need to say that; it's so baked in. Obviously, the organism is a kind of primary thing in biology, but there is no organism without population, and there is no economic individual without a society. And in fact, there's never been life. There's never been an individual living being. There's only ever been ecosystem. So the system, the collective, is actually primary. Individuals are subservient into that, are embedded within it. They only make sense and persist and exist as part of it. They're brought about by it. They are not agents of change. They're not kind of autonomous in the way that we, I think, like to think of ourselves as being. So the notion that collectives are more primary, should lean into the idea that that's our natural state, I think is kind of the sort of ideology that's hidden underneath this much kind of more bland sort of picture of, wouldn't it be nice just to collect some data and get some value out of it? Nobody can really argue against that, I don't think. But I think a lot of people could argue against giving up autonomy and the primacy of being an individual. But you know, I guess I read stuff by Richard Dawkins when I was a kid, The Selfish Gene, and the notion that we're all individuals in competitive interactions, and that if there's any altruism, if there's any collective stuff, that's just a bizarre thing that needs some attention, and someone needs to explain it because it doesn't make sense. I think society has bought into that wholeheartedly. I don't think at every stage in our history that was the way that it was natural to think, and at least taking a little time to wonder whether a different framing in terms of collectives might kind of bring forth something that would be useful. It is so. One issue is that we're talking about such huge scales. So everyone with diabetes in a country the size of the UK is a unimaginably large number of people. You can't. No one has that many friends. No one has a family that's that big. And you know, you might have some people have that many followers on Twitter, but I don't think that is a meaningful kind of grouping. So we're probably built to work naturally in collectives that are very small by comparison with that. And so expecting our natural ability to operate within families and small groups, expecting that to just scale naturally to thousands and hundreds of thousands of people it is maybe hopeful. And the one way of interpreting this is, could we build AI that act as a kind of scaffold for that sort of enable our natural ability to be collective entities, enable that to scale effectively without it breaking, becoming toxic and falling apart. So what would AI need to be as a kind of matchmaker or as a grease for the wheels of those interactions, or as guardrails that prevent those communities from going bad? If we gave AI that, which is a very different task. So to go right back to the beginning, the monolithic tasks that AI is being given is just make a picture for me, write a script for me, write some code for me. Those challenges are just a completely different category than help this community to be vital, right? And that's why a kind of life science, ALife sort of framing seems right, because what is it that makes it vital, that makes it persist, that makes it adapt, that stops it from just falling apart? That's a kind of biological question about life, I think. And could an AI that makes our social structures live in that sense feels like a very different AI challenge than can I get this LLM to write some C code for me or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. And personally, I think that like why we should be using technologies, right? Is technology is something that makes our lives better, and leveraging AI for these sorts of things to build better communities, find communities, and to help us thrive as individuals, no matter what our social status is, or our race, or our background, or anything like that. I think it's so important and something so incredibly needed. It feels a lot like we have the technology. Will we finally build it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we need to learn so much about collective intelligences and these dynamics. And of course, this is why we're talking about it in the context of ALife, is because a lot of these things are what researchers are looking at. And I think connecting the two is extremely exciting and also very important. And so I also wanted to ask one last question before we wrap up here. And that question is, are you allowed to talk a little bit more about the open postdoc positions that are
Yeah,
posted?
yeah. So the hub that I talked about is divided into 7 themes. So 5 of those themes are domains like pandemics or the environment or finance. And 2 of the themes are cross-cutting, so they apply to all of these themes. So one of the cross-cutting themes is human-centered design. If we're going to be successful in any of those domains, we're going to need to design things that work for people, that people can interact with. And the second cross-cutting theme is infrastructure and governance. If we're going to do anything like this at national scale, we need to understand and care about the infrastructure and its governance can be fit for purpose. So each of those themes is led by an academic or 2 academics from one of our partner universities, and each of those themes will be pursuing kind of case study research with a team that combines the 2 academics, or 1 academic, with 2 postdocs and 2 PhD students per theme for 5 years. So the adverts for those posts are going out on our webpage, so ai4ci.ac.uk. They're kind of staggered, so some of those job ads are open, other job ads will be coming out soon. PhD positions, I think if you get in touch with any of the academics on our webpage and ask them about PhD opportunities, I'm sure they'll be very excited to talk to you about it. So that creates a kind of research community in some sense within the hub. We also have a unique bit of our budget which we will spend on co-funding startup projects across the UK in AI for collective intelligence over the next 5 years. So the notion there is, although there are 7 universities involved in the hub, its job is partly to stimulate new AI for collective intelligence research in every UK university in collaborative projects. Those are projects that will have UK academics working with non-academic stakeholders or working maybe with academics from outside the UK. So we will open a funding vehicle for that. A call will go out at the end of the summer, and we'll be looking to fund those sorts of projects over the next 5 years. Ideally, those projects will be, although they're kind of seed corn, kind of incubator type projects that will lead to bigger things. And by the end of the hub's first 5 years of its existence, we'll be able to see significant projects in this kind of space happening across the UK. And although, you know, the way that I've spoken represents my own personal take on this, but there are, I hope what has come over at times is the sense that there are multiple different ways of prosecuting this kind of research. We're pretty open, so we're hoping a kind of raft of things that we end up funding will span a very broad range of approaches to these kind of questions.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This is a fantastic crossroads. We absolutely loved hearing about your new hub, and I also wanted to ask about the postdoc systems because I know a bunch of friends are interested. So if you're watching this, please go to, it was AI CI UK.
.ac.uk.
Yeah. So please go there and check it out. And if you haven't done so yet, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see notifications about when the next Crossroads is and our other online events. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. Bye.